50 IB schools, 30 authorized, 20 candidate, and then all sorts of other innovative learning models for like our high-need schools. Doing a lot of work for African-American boys to help catch them up at those really, really low-performing schools. College counseling.
All right. Looks like we are live, Dr. Bryant. Perfect. So we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for those that are joining Dr. Bryant in the district office. And thank you for those that are watching online as well. My name is Molly Swartzoff. I'm the Senior Vice President with Ray & Associates at a search firm helping your board conduct the superintendent search, along with the president of our firm, Mr. Michael Collins. Before we get started, I do want to let everybody know that if you are logging in, you should be prompted to see a candidate impression form. If not, they are on the district website as well. We do encourage you to fill those out as the board is very, very conscientious and wants to see your impressions of the candidate. So that's just a little side note. But we'll go ahead and get started. It's 3:30 local time. We do have 45 minutes. We'll start out with about a 5 to 10 minute intro for Dr. Bryant to share a little bit about himself and his history, and then we'll get started right with the questions.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. It's been a fabulous day here in Salt Lake City. As you know, I come from Texas and we're struggling a little bit. Don't quite have the electricity and water. So I don't mind the snow at all today. Like, sign me up for the snow as long as I'm in a warm building. But on a serious note, I've had the pleasure of meeting so many great staff members throughout the day. And I think this is a really exciting place to be. So I'm excited to be a candidate for your superintendent of schools. And a little bit about myself, because you might be wondering, who is this guy from Texas? What's he about? How did he get to this place in the process? And I would say, I can't speak for what the board thinks, but I would like to characterize myself as, an innovative thinker, somebody who thinks outside of the box, someone who really understands that the most important thing in a school would be, students who feel safe and eager to learn, but also teachers that are well supported and trained and receive everything they need to be successful. I believe in that really deeply. A little bit about myself. I started my career in education as a high school math teacher. I taught in a Title I, predominantly Hispanic high school, where I taught geometry. So I had 9th through 12th actually, but primarily 9th and 10th graders. We had some kiddos that needed to take it again. And I loved it. I mean, I loved working with my students, and I loved working in an environment where I did feel like I had great levels of support and opportunities to really thrive. So even though I was first and second year teacher, early on, I was actually helping lead the math curriculum department for the district. Then also I'm a data nerd, so I had the opportunity to really look at teacher performance data and to help figure out ways to fine tune how teachers can get better in their craft. So I love that piece. And I knew that I wanted to be in education for a really long time. I think for me, it was about figuring out, how do I want to make my impact? I knew that I wanted to help students in urban districts. I wanted to help students who, probably are low income or probably, come from places where, they might be overlooked unless somebody really, takes a step to give them extra resources to succeed. So I decided that my next step after teaching would be to essentially start a nonprofit from the ground up. It was supposed to be a nonprofit. And essentially the idea was we would find our bright, academically thriving students in low-income schools who are very low-income themselves, and give them everything that they need to succeed at the nation's top colleges and universities. It was very niche, but it was a program that really spoke to my heart, and it impacted my decisions later down the line. So I'll tell you a little bit about that. Essentially, we targeted those schools because they happen to be ones that invest a ton into individual students once they get to college. They happen to be free if you're low income, so it's cheaper than a community college or an open four-year if you're eligible for a Pell Grant if you're low income, essentially. And then, they have those support systems. So fast forward, I grew out that program from, just a handful of kids to serving thousands of students. So we have thousands of students in 164 colleges. They're persisting at a graduation rate of 90%. And we've actually expanded to 5 districts in Texas, and we'll be expanding to our national site in the next couple of years. So I'm an ally in that work. But I think what I realized is that it wasn't so much the college piece that I was passionate about. It was really being a change agent. So I've spent the last 5 years, almost 6 years, as an executive in Houston ISD, which is our largest school district in Texas. It's the 7th largest district in the country with over 200,000 students, about 30,000 staff members, and as you can imagine, almost as many schools as days in the year. And I've loved it because I've been involved in decisions that impact hundreds of thousands of people. And I love being able to think outside the box to help communities that need that outside of box thinking. So I've taken on a lot of initiatives. So I raised about $10 million to expand college counseling in Houston. So when I started in HISD, 28 high schools didn't have a single college counselor at all. So we raised the money to put one in every school. And then fast forward 6 years, now we have a college counselor in all the high schools and also college counselors in our middle schools. We have about 50 middle schools that didn't really have somebody in that role. And we saw a great need for that to build a pipeline. And now we've expanded college counseling down to the 5th grade level. So as a leader, I manage hundreds of people in 80 different buildings across a huge city. And I'm in this because I'm really passionate about serving those students. And when I think about Salt Lake City, I see a city that has similar potential in that our demographics are changing. There's a lot of questions about what our enrollment is going to be moving forward. So how can I make Salt Lake City schools the premier destination for folks that live in the area? Right? Unlike a lot of other states, you don't necessarily need to be zoned to a Salt Lake City school to go here. We're in a unique position to really make sure that our teachers are prepared and resourced to make groundbreaking change that will attract even more students here for the years to come. I see that opportunity here. And I also see the need of our students, whether they're homeless or a minority or low income, whatever that is. I think they need a little extra help to even go to greater heights. So that's what I've spent my career doing at a high level. And I think that's something I can bring to Salt Lake City as your superintendent. So I am very excited to answer any and all of your questions.
Great, wonderful. So we'll go ahead and get started with the very first one. Please share your understanding of shared governance in Salt Lake City School District. What do you see as potential strengths and weaknesses in this process? And please describe past experiences you've had with collective decision making.
Yeah, I think shared decision making, shared governance, whatever you want to call it, is something that's really important to Salt Lake. That's something that I've heard all day from various stakeholders because we feel that we have a lot of schools here in Salt Lake City serving a lot of students. And we can't do one size fits all initiatives that is going to attempt to serve every single community and subpopulation. That probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So as I interpret it as, potentially the future superintendent, is that, I shouldn't use my seat to, put sweeping changes that impact every single school exactly the same way. It's incumbent upon me to be very intentional and to respect all the different subgroups and stakeholders in our district. And chief among them would be our teachers union as well, because I want to hear what the teachers are seeing. We're in unprecedented times right now, for example. And if there's something that's making your job harder, I want to know about it because I'm not in the classroom every day. But when I learn about these issues, I can think about ways I can leverage my team to solve them in a way that makes sense for your school. So the shared decision making is important because it means that things may not happen very quickly. But when we figure out the ways to serve Salt Lake City students, it's going to be because our campus leaders and staff and stakeholders have thought about, these are my resources, these are my kids, and I understand their communities and parents, and I'm going to do what works to serve this group of students, really at the campus level. That's important to me, especially because, again, we serve so many different schools. We have similar philosophies in Houston, but I will say, something that I want to continue having conversations with this group and, my senior staff and other stakeholders about is, you have to be careful, right? So the beauty of having a model where we make a lot of decisions at the site level is that we can innovate in ways that will impact our students most authentically because we know what their needs are, right? But that means as superintendent, I need to make sure that my principals receive adequate training and resources. So that way, they're not taking shots in the dark trying to innovate. They're well trained on how to manage budgets, how to motivate staff, how to solve cultural issues, and how to advocate for, things that they want while also understanding what the community needs. So that way things are, we're basically covering all of our bases by engaging with these stakeholders. And in the absence of those resources, we're taking shots in the dark across dozens of schools. And that's what I don't want. So for example, like I mentioned, in Houston, there were 28 high schools that did not have a college counselor. And part of the reason for that was because we had decided that we were going to let our campus leaders be very autonomous in their staffing. And it looks like 28 principals made the decision to not hire a college counselor. And there's no judgment for it. Sometimes they needed an extra police officer or social worker or whatever that is, extra teacher. But what that indicates to me as an executive leader, as superintendent of schools, is that we need to either realign on our priorities, and if whether it's every school offers such and such, or every school gets this amount of money and you determine how it's used, we need to have those conversations, because I think that if you take it too far one direction, you could exacerbate inequities. And really, I think my role as superintendent, from my vantage point, is to be really a voice for equity and inclusion in our schools, which could mean to push people's thought process on these types of issues as it relates to staffing especially, but also to have my thoughts pushed as well. That's very important to me as a leader.
What do you feel is the role of teachers associations, and what familiarity do you have with unions? What has your experience been like working with education associations in previous districts?
Sure. So things work a little differently in Texas. So we don't have teachers unions, but we have very influential associations who I meet with monthly to discuss board items that pertain to issues that the association wants to talk about. So we're constantly at the table discussing ways in which, adding a new program, taking away a program, enhancing an approach could impact our teachers. And I love those conversations because I'm not the type of person that wants to just hear what I want to hear all day. I think that I've grown as a leader really quickly because I lead with empathy and by listening. You'll meet a lot of people out there in the world, especially in administration, that they kind of listen so they can formulate their next response. And I think what you'll realize very quickly about me is that I'm going to be very quiet while you're talking, because I really want to listen to what you're saying. I really want to understand what are the common questions that I'm getting over and over again, so I can synthesize that and I can create action. I really want to understand problems deeply. And I think one of the best ways to go about it is frequent conversations with our teachers' unions. And I'm not just talking about issues that pertain to negotiations and that sort of thing, but really even day to day too. Like, what are we hearing? Some of us in the room are teachers right now. What are you seeing? What are your colleagues saying? What can I do better as a leader? What types of training or things should I rehash with principals that maybe is just not landing? I'm definitely a believer in the chain of command, so to speak, but I think that we're small enough in Salt Lake City to where I can engage with stakeholders such as our teachers very regularly and hear directly from them. So that way I can understand, what that we talk about here in the district office is not actually happening in the schools that we all want to happen. We just need the how. That's really important to me. I think the union is going to be a key part of that. And again, I'm someone who welcomes dissent. I welcome, different perspectives because I think that the best solutions are the ones generated by dialogue. So I'm not a unilateral, my way or the highway, because I don't have that power. We have a shared decision-making model, so I'm very realistic. And honestly, I'm someone who believes in the role of a teacher as really the champion of learning in their school. So if whatever I'm doing is not positively impacting teachers and their resources and their training and their experience, then it's probably not an initiative worth anybody's time. And I think you all really help to check me to make sure that we're serving our teachers right.
There is a shortage of substitutes, making it difficult or impossible for teachers to stay home when they are sick. Increasing the daily rate for substituting could improve the situation. What other solutions would you propose?
I'm open to that. Of course, that's a human resources issue that we would need to talk through, and I need to know the details about how things work in Utah and in this district. But I think that's one approach. There are finite resources, but at the end of the day, I think most of us at this table agree that we need somebody in our schools to help our kids. And I think that our substitute teachers play a role in that on the short term, or sometimes even longer term. So, what can I do as a leader to help make that happen? So one way is compensation. Another way would be to, have a dedicated pool of associate teachers that float between campuses or own campuses, or thinking about new ways to create pipelines or partnerships with outside organizations to get people who are qualified and credentialed to do that work, whether it's short-term or longer term. Because at the end of the day, especially in these unprecedented times, I want to make sure that our staff feel safe and they feel that if they're going through either mental stress or they're scared about their health, or they feel like their work conditions aren't quite where they need to be, they can take some time for themselves. That's important to me. And I'm going to look at that data. And if there are upward trends, then we need to mix it up. Why do people not feel safe enough to go to work? So I think substitutes are really a symptom of that. But from my vantage point, I'm trying to think of like the big vantage point where, how many students are electing to go to in-person classes? How many teachers are saying that they feel comfortable right now going to school if they're vaccinated or not vaccinated? There are all these different things, and I want to make sure the classes are covered. We can do creative things like, consolidating classes or really rethinking our schedule, things that a lot of people don't want to do because, it disrupts a very well-oiled machine that we put a lot of thought in. But I think anything's on the table, because at the end of the day, this isn't about serving the needs of, adults per se. This is about making sure that our teachers feel that they have the supports that they need to undergo some of the most challenging months they've probably ever had in their teaching careers during this pandemic. And it's not going to end just because we have the vaccine. So I just want to make sure that this is a nice transition. And aside from substitutes, even leveraging, online learning as a way for students that thrive in that environment or teachers that thrive in that environment to do that. I think that we can really rethink the way that we structure our schools and enrollment and staffing well beyond substitutes. But that's one of the things that I want to talk about. And it seems reasonable in my view to raise the wage.
Substitute.
Describe an example of your work as an administrator for substantive improvement of the teacher experience.
Could you repeat that, Molly? I missed that.
That's okay. Describe an example of your work as an administrator for substantive improvement of the teacher experience.
Sure. So as I always say, as one of my longtime superintendent mentors always tells me, like, the teacher is the program. You have to invest in teacher development to really see long-standing changes. People notice that I'm younger and they assume that, oh, he must love the apps and he must love like all this digital learning stuff. And I think there is some cool stuff to be said about online learning, but believe it or not, I'm actually very traditionalist in that I think that the teacher is the most important thing. I'm an executive for a very large organization that has a multi-billion-dollar budget. So we have vendors all the time coming to, parade this website as the way that we're going to educate all the children, close all the gaps. And I don't believe that if that has nothing to do with the teacher's own professional development and training. So I happen to support our advanced placement teachers. So we're talking thousands of teachers across all the content areas, and I'm responsible with making sure that they have all the tools they need to teach really rigorous content. And I also work in an urban district where we don't have the luxury of always having our most experienced teachers teaching those subjects. Sometimes they get tossed into it earlier in their careers when it really takes a few years to get really good at teaching that particular type of content, is what we've seen in the data. So I've really doubled down on all sorts of different professional development that I would love to scale to other disciplines as well. So for example, every single one of our AP teachers has their registration paid for to go to what we call advanced placement institutes, which I really believe are fantastic ways to learn from your colleagues on the ins and outs of content, but also creating a network of people where we talk about content areas. That's one piece. But then I also know, just as a teacher myself, who has been in this work for a while, is that being an AP reader, just as one specific example, is huge for our teachers. So to really make sure that we give them the flexibility to go and grade AP tests, during the summer, so they can understand the process from the other end, so they can go back to the schools and they could teach their own content in a way that works for them, is a beautiful thing. One of the things that always struck me in HISD is that we have the highest performing schools in the country. Really, we have multiple top 10 ranked schools in Houston ISD, but we have the lowest performing schools in the state. And yet your experience in a classroom could be vastly different depending on your zip code, which I don't think is okay. So I've just wondered for years, like, how can we really draw upon and reward teachers that are doing really well in teaching a content and helping them mentor other teachers. So I love thinking outside the box where, what if we had teachers that full-time taught content areas that they love teaching, and they're not necessarily assigned to a campus, but maybe they rotate between campuses in a way that's great for their schedule. And we pay them more to provide leadership development for their teachers and coaching in a way that feels authentic to them. A lot of our teachers want to take on leadership roles, I've seen in my experience, but they don't want to leave the classroom. But maybe they want to, have different responsibilities to where they can do what they love in a way that makes sense. So one way that I piloted it was launching these advanced placement academies, also for IB2, where essentially we bring in our top talent AP teachers, And they are, paid additional compensation to teach on a Saturday. Of course, they invite all their own kids to participate in this, but they also get the opportunity to teach other students from other schools as well. So it benefits everybody. You get students who they may have a novice AP teacher, and now they're learning from somebody different and somebody who's probably done this for a while, and they learn a lot. I think a lot of us, when we hear the same thing from different people, it kind of clicks. But on top of that, I leverage it as a good PD opportunity, where we also compensated our novice AP teachers to go and observe that as well. So they got to see somebody else teach their own specific content area, and they could share resources and create a community in a very large district that can sometimes feel isolating for teachers. Like, I love establishing those communities. Another initiative that applies to AP, but really could apply anywhere, is I launched a few weeks ago virtual study halls, which sounds kind of like not fun, but it actually is really fun, where basically you also compensate advanced placement teachers and dual credit teachers and IB teachers, and they really own these virtual study hall sessions where kids from all over the district come and they ask questions on their homework for that day or whatever they learned that day. And once or twice a week, they go and they engage with these master teachers on these topics, and they love it. And the teachers love it too, because, our AP teachers, they will do whatever it takes for their kids. And oftentimes I don't think they get paid enough for that. So to be able to compensate them to be the expert teachers that they are, and to connect them to students that wouldn't necessarily have access to their teachers otherwise, I love that. And I would love to expand that to other areas too, especially in a large district like a Houston or even a Salt Lake. I think we can figure out ways to figure out who are our top teaching talent and figure out creative ways to really elevate their leadership and develop them and create a pipeline for whatever their life streams are, whether it's to be the best AP teacher or best history teacher in the state of Utah, or whether it's to be an instructional leader for their colleagues in the district. I'm really sensitive to that leadership development and that content pedagogical support.
Okay, next one's kind of a long one. In our school communities, we have students who have to work, have childcare responsibilities, have language challenges, and have weighty family responsibilities. Our educational system must not be a one-size-fits-all. How would you enable more flexibility in our system to accommodate/consider the specific needs of each of our students, their families, and school communities?
That's a great question. And, people ask me all the time, aren't you ready to go back to normal? And honestly, what I tell them every time is, no, I'm not. I don't want to go back to 2019. I want to look forward to 2021 and 2022. Because here's the thing, we've learned a lot of things from this terrible situation, but that I think could improve education for the better. What if more people are working remotely? Not just teachers, but also staff here as well. And we can hire talent from all over the state that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise, because we had the flexibility of offering somebody the opportunity to work remotely. One thing that I think that we're realizing is that there were students who did thrive in online learning. And then similarly, there are teachers that love online teaching, and some don't, and that's fine. I don't think I could do the online teaching, but I really want to talk to those teachers that are really good at it, because if I can find them and if I can create a new role for them where they're teaching, but they're online and they're doing what they thrive in, and they could reach students that span multiple schools, why wouldn't we consider that? Why wouldn't we think of ways to create cores of virtual teachers that do what a lot of other, virtual districts do, but really do with our people that we can provide our resources and training and coaching to, where it's not that you're owning a school, but you're really owning a content, you're owning a learning style. Some of the ways that teachers are engaging online is less about their, content knowledge, but it's more about, they're very engaging. Our kids are on the TikTok or whatever they're on these days. And they like the short and sweet, and they like people who can engage them and make them laugh or feel relatable, even if they're very far away. So I want to meet these people, and I want to figure out how I can elevate them to where they can continue doing that. It's going to mean moving around the puzzle pieces if we have finite resources. But I'm the type of guy that loves partnerships. And I think that if I can have a tried and tested, innovative online instructional model, just as one example, I can get foundations to foot the bill for some of that and to add resources. That's what I do. I raise money and I sell ideas to people, and then I make it work. Because, it's not so much about, the day-to-day of the job that excites me, but it's really about bringing all sorts of people to the table, our unions to the table, our philanthropic community to the table, the business community. So that way we can get all the resources that we need to do innovative stuff. I don't have what they call a deficit mindset, which means I always see the stuff that could go wrong, or, I don't have enough money for that. I'm, for better or for worse, I'm an only child, and I liked getting what I wanted as a kid, and I like getting what I want now. So, if there's something that I want, whether it's an innovative model to pay our teachers more for the work that they're doing, like, let's do it. But I'm going to need your support in really crafting in a way that makes sense to the community. And then I'll make the pitch, and I can enter the boardrooms and talk to our business leaders and foundations and that sort of thing and try it. And I think that something that I model, that I hope our teachers and principals will model after me, is I'm not afraid to try something different that could fail. And I'm not afraid to let other people try things that are different, whether you're a teacher or a staff member or a principal, and fail, because it's okay to fail. I mean, who rode a bike for the first time and they just rode down the street without any sort of incident? That wasn't me. I still can't ride a bike to this day, just the Peloton. But it's okay to fall, because it's when you fall, you learn what you can do better. And I don't want to castigate somebody or demean somebody because something messed up, because I want to work with people that want to be here and do good things for kids. And sometimes we don't get it right, but now we can try another idea. That could be the next big thing. I think some of the things that I talked about could be big things once I get more input from folks like you all. So that's very exciting for me.
And just so you know, we've got about 20 minutes left. Based on our experience with remote learning, and what do you see as opportunities for innovation going forward?
Yeah, sure. And, I kind of touched on this, but I think that there are students that thrive in online environments, and I think there are teachers that thrive in online environments. So let's try to figure out a way to combine those two stakeholders together. The way that we're doing it right now nationwide just does not work. And I wish that that wouldn't have happened in as many schools as it did, where a teacher had to juggle their in-person students as well as our online students, right? You're kind of asking them to be really good at two different things, really, and you're not giving them more resources and support in many districts' cases. So I want to prevent that. I'm all about finding the right spot for people on the bus, because I think we're all on the same mission. We all want to help kids achieve, but some of us might have learned that we do this better in an online modality or hybrid modality, or a way that we reach more students, or, we can approach education differently. I really do think so. And I think that this situation has really opened our eyes to all of the different possibilities, or things that we haven't even thought about. I've always been someone who has been skeptical of a lot of the things that come from the state level, specifically around seat time, for example. I don't personally believe that we should have minutes determine whether a student gets a credit. I believe in mastery. Even things like grade levels. I think that there are ways that we could think about that differently. Now, as superintendent, I need to follow all the regulations from our state. But what I'm saying is that I'm going to be the person that's going to really push people's thinking, because I think that once we can eliminate some of these red tape barriers, I can make teachers' jobs easier. I think what people, realize once they get to the administration side is that sometimes our hands are really held behind our backs by the folks who are telling us, well, you need to go back to this type of modality, or we're going to hold back funding, or we're going to do this or that. And then we make decisions that don't help teachers. So I'm about really figuring out, what's the most concrete, succinct way that I can convey a message to an audience. I'll get on the Twitter, I'll get on the YouTube, and I'll talk about this. I hope the state of Utah is watching. I'm watching the way that, we're going about certain things, and I don't like it. And I think that once we choose to intentionally invest more into schools, we can invest more in teachers and invest more in our communities. That's important to me. So we have a lot of room that we can grow if we get certain other stakeholders on board with doing things differently.
Wonderful. And we have one final question that's prepared, and then we do have a few that were submitted in the chat. So we'll go ahead and get through this one real quick and then go into those. So sorry, it's been a long couple days. Describe your education philosophy and approach to your potential superintendency in Salt Lake City School District. Do you see yourself as someone who could steady the ship? Or is there a program or project that may be outside the box that you would like to explore in Salt Lake City School District?
I think it's safe to say that I'll want to try something that's out of the box, but I really respect the dignity of the shared decision making. So I want to make sure that I gather input from my stakeholders, my teachers, my principals, my board members, my community. So I really understand what Salt Lake needs. I knew what Houston needed. I was there for a while. I was in the system for a really long time. But here I'm the new guy, and I want to be really respectful of that. So I wouldn't just come in and make things happen right away. But that said, if you put in the same inputs, you get out the same outputs. And sometimes you don't even get that luxury. None of us would have predicted a pandemic that changes everything. Even if your inputs are the same and they were good before, they might be bad now. So I'm somebody that constantly looks forward and that has succession pipelines, so we can brace for crisis, not serious crisis, but in terms of volatility, whether it's, people moving on to new roles or people, changing leadership or changing priorities or changes in state funding. I think you always need to be about 2 or 3 steps ahead of, where the ball is so that you can make things happen. So, my educational philosophy is to never tie myself down to the ways that we did things before. And for better or for worse, I think the elephant in the room, other than why is it colder in Texas than in Utah, that's the big elephant in the room. But I think the other one is, why do we tie ourselves down to these things that we're doing just to do them? And as a first-time superintendent, which is the other elephant in the room, this would be my first superintendency, I think there's a lot of value to that, in that there isn't a certain way that I want to go about things, but there are certain things that you'll notice about me. So it's leading by listening, it's leading through empathy, and it's always leading with our teachers and students in mind, and not getting too caught up in all these, fly-by-night fads and things that, claim to make change. I really know where the change happens, and it's the hard work that happens day in and day out in our classrooms. Like, I am a fierce advocate for making sure that our time with our students is sacred. So what can I need to do? What do I need to do that? Like, how do I need to invest resources? How do I need to fundraise? How do I need to, rethink how we train our teachers? And, I think my other leadership philosophy is to have your succession plans. I think my second passion in another life would be human resources, in the sense that I like thinking about leadership development. So I like thinking about growing our own, both in terms of the principal side. So thinking through, how can I kind of create like an aspiring principals or aspiring instructional coach or dean's pipeline, and really educating our teachers on all the ways they can make an impact on students. Sometimes that is teaching, but if you want to be a lifelong teacher, that's great. But I want to figure out, what do you need to be even better? Is it making sure that you're nationally board certified? Is it this extra professional development? Is it making a call to the college board and helping you be somebody that can make videos that are seen by the masses? Whatever that is, I think there are ways to elevate and create leadership pipelines for all of our teachers. And I think that all of us, love being in the classroom, but I would go a little bit deeper when I talk to my teachers and ask, like, what about teaching gets you excited? I know for me, I love the lesson planning. I'm an organizer. There was a time a long time ago when I used to be perfectionist, and that ended very quickly after my first year of teaching. But I like being organized. So then I was like, well, what if I could take my Excel skills and, make the district better, make schools better? And when I talk to teachers, I may hear something differently. I may hear that, they really love getting to understand, not just what a student needs, but what their siblings needs, and really building those family relationships and community engagement piece. Or other teachers are really excited about working alongside their colleagues or going to trainings, or really becoming better at, leading their peers as department chairs or grade level chairs and deans. And I want to hear that. And I want to hear, okay, well, if you want to be a department chair one day, like, what structures do we have to build you up to that? If it's not at the school, maybe there's something at the district level that we can do to set you up with that. How do I connect somebody at X elementary school that wants to be the best 5th grade teacher to somebody who's doing a really good job, maybe somewhere else, not super close to them, but, offering to, pay for a sub for the day for them to go and observe really master teachers and to learn from them. I don't think that we can learn in silos and, long-term online forever. I think that we really need to foster creativity and collaboration and shadowing and mentorship. And that goes, again, for instructional staff and also our leadership staff. And that way, when the seat does open up and change does happen, we're not scrambling to make sure that we have an effective teacher or principal somewhere. We thought about this, we saw this coming, and we hired and we recruited and we trained people with that in mind.
What specifically would you do to vastly improve the diversity of the administrators and faculty in Salt Lake City School District?
Sure. I would need to look at the numbers a little bit more deeply to understand what about diverse, because we all use that word in different ways. So I just want to make sure we're all using the same language. So when I think of diversity, maybe we want our staff at schools to more represent the communities that they're based in. That's one train of thought. I'm not saying that's what the question's asking. Or maybe it's diversity of thought. I've done a lot of questions today about, teachers and staff sometimes feeling like, it can feel hostile at work. I can feel that, I'm being judged for, who I am or how I see the world. And I've always been somebody that really welcomes dialogues, even if they're difficult to have, and to really equip leaders, especially, to model how to create those safe spaces, because I don't think a safe space is coming to the table and always agreeing. I think of a safe space, even in a professional environment, to be more like a family dinner room discussion, which sometimes we just talk about football, but sometimes we talk about football and we have different teams that we're rooting for, right? So like we have those divides, we have those things where, we view the world in different ways. I view the world in a different way than a lot of you all probably do, and I certainly view it differently than the way that a lot of our students do. So I need to welcome those perspectives and hear things that I don't want to hear sometimes, because I think diversity of thought is also important as well as, diversity of, the makeup of our staff. And let's say that, our staff may not be diverse, quote unquote. I don't know what the nature of the question was, but really thinking of ways that we all have tools in our toolbox to engage with stakeholders that, bring up a difficult conversation. There are all sorts of scenarios that I'm sure you've seen in your roles as teachers where I really don't know how to address it. Especially now, like we're so divided on, things as simple as vaccination, wearing a mask, or whatever that is. And like this ignites dialogues that are really dicey for some teachers to even talk about. So what are we doing as a district to provide resources to okay, if we have this conversation, how do we talk about it in a way that's not casting judgment, but is also trying to educate and be grounded in facts, but also from a perspective of wanting to listen. I think half of the battle is listening to a perspective, even if we don't like it, and then trying to come to some sort of common ground. I think that's half the battle. I think when you combat one, negative thing with another negative thing, then I think the message gets lost. So that's something that I would think critically about. And again, I think diversity also comes down to our willing to listen to diversity of thought so we can become better, even if it's not what we want to hear.
Your resume and professional experiences are impressive. With that being said, you've only been employed as a classroom teacher for 2 years. Now you are seeking to lead an immense population of educators and staff that have more classroom experience than you do. Why should you lead an entire school district when your own classroom experience is comparable to that of a teacher?
Well, that's the question. And that's why my job today is to really just share with you who I am. And some of you may like who I am and what I stand for, which is really being a champion for teachers. And some of you might desire somebody that has, XYZ credential in a classroom. I think that's fair. I don't judge one way or another. Obviously, I want to hear people say, oh, yeah, no, your credentials are fine. But you know what? I mean, I am who I am. And what I would say is that, I'm never going to be the superintendent that was the best teacher and the best human resources professional and the best operations professional in transportation, nutrition services, or department chair. Let's say I taught in high school for 20 years. I would have never been in elementary or middle school or alternative schools. Like there's so many experiences that I wish I could have, but I didn't. But I've always thought about ways that I could kind of use the cards that I'm dealt to at least somewhat prepare me for what might come next. And for me, that's why I love spending so much time in Houston ISD. I've had a great 8 years, and I could easily be there for another 8 years because it's a district that has a lot of need, is very diverse, has tons of teaching talent that looks very different from very experienced to highly effective novice teachers and everything in between. And I would say that my superpower isn't that I was the, Superman teacher. It's more that whenever I meet somebody, whether it's somebody that I work with or works for me, I always talk to them and I try to figure out what makes this person special. I truly think that there's something special within all of us, and I try to emulate that for myself. So even though I won't necessarily be the best teacher, I really think critically about what do all of my favorite teachers have in common, and how can I bring those character traits into my own practice? Because that's what's going to help me at the end of the day. Because my job isn't to be in the classroom and to teach a fantastic geometry class, though I think I could teach a pretty good geometry class these days. But it really is to understand what needs are. I think teaching is very important, but I think anybody choosing a superintendent needs to also prioritize somebody that can really listen to what people need and who has the track record to get people what they need. Who's somebody that's not going to stand in the way, who's going to put up barriers to innovate or be successful in my job, and who's going to be the one who listens, puts the right people in place, and just lets them do their thing. and meet their goals in a way that makes sense for them. I get the sense that here in Salt Lake City, we really value our autonomy and our ability to make changes based on what we see in our classroom and what we see in our community at our school. And I want to respect that too. But the kind of the trade-off there is that we're all going to be working on a unified set of visions and goals and standards that I'll set at the superintendent level. You get to make that happen in whatever way works best for you authentically. So I think for those reasons, I may not have everything to bring to the table, but I think I have something there, and I hope that you'll consider it.
Thank you, Dr. Bryant. Last question, we got about 5 minutes left. What is an example of a challenging experience that you had as a classroom teacher, and how did you handle it? In hindsight, how could you have handled it differently, if at all?
Yeah, it's been a minute. That's a really good question. I think about the times that make me the most upset, and I think it's the times when, a student would be failing my class and I knew that they could do better. Like if I could just be with them like an extra 5 hours a week, they could get there. There's so many needed more time. Like there's so many. I don't have a specific anecdote. It's probably what the person wanted. I wish I had something. I should have thought about this more deeply. But when I look back kind of over, the past 10 years, what haunts me is that as a teacher, we have a finite amount of time. And in my first year of teaching, I was learning things just like anybody's learning their first year of teaching. And I would sit my kiddos that I wanted to give extra intervention to at the very front of the room. So that way I could, proximity, so I can go and be close to them and make sure that they're doing all the right steps. And I think what always haunted me is that, I should have spent more time in the back of the room too. And I should have spent more time in the middle of the room, because I think that we all have a potential that needs to be met. And I feel like there are so many students, especially in the back of the room, probably more brilliant than me in math by a long shot in 9th grade. And they probably ended up going to community college because they didn't get that extra nudge or that somebody that should have said, you can do this. I really value teachers for a lot of reasons. I used to say crazy things as a kid. I'd be like, I'm going to be the president of the United States, or I'm going to be I used to be obsessed with becoming the Secretary of Health and Human Services. I don't know why. I wanted to be I think I wanted to be like a non-elected official that impacts health, public health. So anyway, I think the most powerful thing that my teacher did for me was they never said you couldn't do it. They always said, you do you, Jarrett, you do you. I believe in you. I actually dedicated my dissertation, fun fact, to a teacher that impacted my life. She said, when I was writing a little assignment for her, she told me, and this is in 5th grade, Jarrett, you can paint a picture with words. And that was really important to me because I'm a terrible artist. I can't draw a stick figure right, but it happens to be that my craft is writing. And I thought about that, 20 plus years later when I was writing a dissertation, because I believed her. I really did believe that, okay, well, maybe I can do this. Maybe writing's my thing. I don't have to be a good painter, artist in that sort of way. I have my own authentic way of leading, my own authentic way of doing things. So, I reflect on those types of things, and I feel like I could have been that teacher. I could have told more kids that they could paint a picture with words. And I just wish there were more time in a day, because I really feel like some children's lives would be fundamentally different had I just taken that extra second to say, you're special. I know it's stressful on the day-to-day, but you're a great person and you're going to thrive.
Great. We actually have about 2 more minutes, and I have one last question, if that's okay. All right. With our system of shared governance, an item that cannot be resolved between the teachers and administrators at a school is then referred to the superintendent. Your task as superintendent is to hear the rationale from both sides and make a decision to resolve the conflict. Please tell us how you would weigh the arguments and make a decision.
Sure. So I think you really need to have a consistent process in those situations where it's not me deciding ad hoc for this situation, this is how I'm going to do it. We're in a big system with a lot of moving pieces, and I think we need to treat all those situations consistently. So there needs to be a structure, and there probably needs to be multiple steps where if there is some sort of investigation happening between two different parties, where multiple stakeholders hear it, maybe the people most connected to the issue directly. And if we don't have resolution there, then we go a step up to maybe somebody that is in the school or in the community a little bit farther removed. And then it escalates up to where, eventually I get involved or other people get involved, to where a lot of us are hearing the set of facts and we can come to a conclusion based on the objective facts. I think people need the opportunity to have their story heard by multiple people, both those involved and those not involved. Because at the end of the day, we need to make sure that people know that there is accountability if there's something nefarious that was done or said that made somebody feel unsafe, but also making sure that the consequences are consistent too. I'm not a fan of being punitive if you can be restorative. So I really like thinking about these situations, both at the staff level and student level, and come to some sort of conclusion because, and I talked about this earlier this morning, a lot of folks operate using technical solutions when they really should be doing adaptive solutions. So if you just say, well, you two shouldn't talk anymore, or we're just going to reassign you to a different class, that's a technical solution. But an adaptive solution is really listening to the other side and understanding, okay, that's their perspective. I don't agree with it, but I'm listening to it. And okay, when I said that, I didn't know that it was going to come off that way, but now I'm hearing it. I guess it did come off that way. And I had my own blind spot. I think when you get to that level on the blooms, like that's really important to me. And then that's going to help prevent things in the future. And it helps that person grow as an individual. So I'm all about these restorative practices and being consistent and aligned because these situations, they arise more often than they should. So we need to be prepared.
Wonderful. All right. Right on time. Thank you so much. And thank you to those around the table that I cannot see. And thank you those that are watching live. We really appreciate everybody. And again, those candidate impression forms are easily accessible on the district website. Please feel free. The board really values your input. And thank you, Dr. Bryant, for your time. It really means a lot.